Unless otherwise indicated, Ratchet Book Club is intended for a mature audience. Viewer discretion is greatly advised. Welcome to Ratchet Book Club, where we read hood classics and good classics. I'm Derek. Oh, I'm sorry. I was letting the applause subside. 916-633-1537. Ratchet and Ratchet at gmail.com. Ratchet Book Club on Twitter. Blook. If you look for me at Ratchet Book Club on Twitter, you're not going to find me. It's Ratchet Book Club on Twitter. You have to excuse me. My tongue is large. I'm married, ladies. Once again, I was waiting for the applause to subside, both for the fact that my tongue is large and I'm married. If y'all don't know I'm married, though, I don't know what you've been listening to. Ratchet Book Club on Twitter, Ratchet Book Club on Facebook. Yeah. Part 5. Just like Pontius Pilate, you washed your hands of me. Chapter 53. 9 miles from Denver, the Rocky Mountain Federal Penitentiary, a maximum security facility, stands atop a foothill stripped of trees and flattened into a plateau. I just want to jump in real quick. So, my youngest son, Kid Awesome, just turned an age where he's going to be leaving the house really soon, or is going to be going to college and staying in the house. It's his choice. He wants to live on campus, but we'll see how that works out. But anyway, so we went to visit a college. He plays ball. And so we went to visit a college and go to one of their camps so then he could play with the college kids and meet the coaches and things of that nature. Nice college. Nearby a movie theater, which is important to me for when I visit him, but really don't need to visit him because he's going to be at school during the day and I would be just tooling around as an old person. I can't wait to tool around as an old person. I can't. I've already got like the outfits. Like I'm going to be that old black dude who wears all Nike sweatsuits. Got them all locked down. Next, I'm going to move to the more dry fit windbreaker type so they look sheerer on me. But yeah, got it. But I'm going to tool around town. And there's a movie theater. So, I can go there. And then there's my favorite store of all time, which is the U.S. Chef store. Which is also right next to Best Buy, which is a great store for me as well. So it fills all of my needs. Now him, he didn't see the town. He didn't. He saw the campus, which he liked. What I saw as we were pulling up to this school, though, which is a new school and is really pretty. Apparently it's only been around for like 4 years. Right down the street from the school, I don't want to say right down the street, but close enough that there's a sign with an arrow pointing. If there's a sign with an arrow pointing, it's close. Like, if it doesn't say, like, I figure it has to be at least 5 miles away for it to say 5 miles down, I think. And this is on, like, regular streets. This isn't off the freeway. This is on just, like, regular streets. One way on this sign pointed towards the college. All right. Okay, cool. One way pointed towards the college. That was to the right. I looked over to the left and to the left was a federal penitentiary. I don't know if I want my son to be going to college a signpost away from a federal penitentiary. I don't think they break out of school or break out of prison that often. They break out of school all the time. Teachers don't care. They're just like, I'm going to grade you regardless. Freshmen, you do not know that. Teachers don't think you're being adventurous when you miss class. They don't give a fuck. They're just going to mark you down and then give a test on what you missed. So don't do it. But yeah, no. I don't think somebody would break out the pen and immediately go to a college, but they definitely would. I mean, I just hadn't thought about it, but now that I'm thinking about it, I mean, I fucking would. Like, there's food there, and there's a ton of dorms to hide out in, and, you know, I can go in and to the library and get the newest books from James Patterson. I don't know. Off the top of my head, I'm like nervous. I should have said Dean Koontz. I'm literally reading a Dean Koontz book. The fuck, dude? Like, what's wrong with you? That's on me. That's my bad. Totally. I'll take that. I will own that. It's owned. Owned. I've owned that. Owned. But yeah. So I don't know if I would want to be that close to a pen. It's like, it's a thing. So I haven't told him yet that he'd be going to school down the street from a pen, because I just figured the first school you go to isn't the first school you're going to want to commit to. You know, you got to keep, you know, there's a lot of fish in the sea. You got to keep your options open. That's what happens when you have good grades. You can fish all you want, just fish. I'm feeling very whimsical today. I just wanted to say that real quick. So back to the Rocky Mountain Federal Penitentiary. The higher slopes behind it and the slopes below are thickly forested. But the grounds of the prison are barren, offering no obstacle as searchlights are needed. No cover for escapees trying to dodge gunfire from guard towers. No inmate has ever escaped from Rocky Mountain. The two ways they get out of there are parole or dead. Tell them about the gun line, boss. The stone walls soar high, punctured only by barred windows too small for any man to squeeze through. The steeply pitched slate roof beetles over every rampart. Above the main gate to the wall parking lot, carved in stone, are the words truth, law, justice, punishment. From the look of the place and considering the class of hardened criminal housed therein, the word rehabilitation was probably not an inadvertent omission. On that Wednesday, November 26th, the fourth of my 5 fateful days, the lowering sky pressing down the prison looked as bleak as any inmate's future. The icy wind bit to the bone. Before we were admitted through the gate to the parking lot, the 3 of us had to get out of the Explorer, while 2 efficient guards searched the vehicle inside and underneath for larger objectionable items such as suitcase bombs and rocket launchers. I'm scared, Lori admitted. You don't have to go with us, I told her. Yeah, I do. Too much is riding on this. I've got to be there. Approved for entry to the lot, we parked as near the walk-in gate as possible. The bitter wind turned even the shortest walk into an ordeal. The staff had the privilege of a heated underground garage. This surface lot served visitors. On the day before Thanksgiving, you might expect a stream of loved ones. Instead, there were 9 empty spaces for every vehicle. Considering that the prisoners were drawn from all over the western states, perhaps the distance was too great for many of their relatives to visit regularly. Or perhaps their families didn't give a damn about them. In some cases, of course, they had killed their families and couldn't reasonably expect holiday reunions. Even in this sentimental season, I was unable to work up any sympathy for the lonely men in those drab cell blocks. Their hearts heavy, and their eyes turned longingly towards birds winging across the ashen sky beyond their mean windows. I've never understood the weird Hollywood mindset that romanticizes convicts and prison life. Besides, most of these guys had TVs, subscriptions to Hustlers, and access to whatever drugs they needed. Inside the main entrance, in a short reception corridor staffed by 3 armed guards, one with a shotgun, we identified ourselves, produced photo IDs, and signed in. We passed through a metal detector and submitted to fluoroscopic examination. Ceiling-mounted cameras watched us. A handsome German shepherd, trained to detect drugs, led his handler's feet, chin cushioned cutely on one paw. The dog raised his head, sniffed in our direction, and yawned. Our stash of aspirin and antacids were insufficient provocation to cause him to spring to his feet, snarling. I wondered how he might respond to visitors with legitimate Prozac prescriptions. I wonder how they teach him how to smell the drugs separately. Like weed, yeah, okay, I got it. I understand that one. How the fuck they know what cocaine smell like? Like, what does cocaine smell like? I don't want to know what cocaine smells like, but how can you discern what cocaine smells like versus, like, Advil? I mean, dogs have really good noses, though, so, and I don't know what they do to those dogs to get them to know what cocaine smells like. I was gonna be a guard dog until I got high. I guess. I don't know. At the end of the corridor, we were examined remotely by another camera. Then, from the farther side, a guard opened another steel door to admit us to a holding chamber. Because our visit had been arranged through Huey Foster, and because of the unusual nature of our business, we were given VIP treatment. The assistant warden himself, accompanied by an armed guard, led us from the holding chamber to an elevator, up 2 floors, along a series of halls, and through 2 additional gates that released after reading his fingerprints when he pressed his right hand against a wall-mounted scanner. Outside the conference room, we were required to take off our coats and hang them on a wall rack. We read a short list headlined Rules of Conduct posted outside the door. Initially, only Lori and I went into the room, which measured approximately 20 feet by 15. Gray vinyl floor tiles, gray walls, low acoustic ceiling with fluorescent panels. The sullen light of a dismal sky seemed barely able to penetrate the glass and wire sandwich windows. Centered in this space was an 8-foot-long conference table. On the farther side of the table stood a single chair. 4 chairs waited on the nearer side. In the lone chair sat Punchinello Bizzo, who did not yet know that he possessed the power either to grant our family a reprieve from tragedy or to condemn us to nearly unendurable suffering. Chapter 54. Welded to Punchinello's side of the table were 2 steel rings that had been wrapped with electrician's tape for sound accentuation. Each of his wrists had been chained to one of those rings. The length of those shackles allowed him to get up from his chair and to stretch his legs in place, but didn't provide him with enough slack to move away from or around the table. The legs of the table were bolted to the floor. Usually, visitors spoke with prisoners through a speaker grill in a bulletproof glass partition, in a communal lounge that served several parties simultaneously. Conference rooms like this one were used most frequently by attorneys who required privacy with their clients. We had requested a private meeting with Punchinello not because we wished to discuss something confidential with them, but because we felt that in a more intimate atmosphere, we'd have a better chance of persuading him to grant the request we had come here to make. The word ambiance was too highbrow to describe the stark and forbidding mood of the conference room. It didn't feel like a place in which a hard-hearted man could be persuaded to do a good-hearted thing. Remaining in the hallway, the guard who had escorted us now closed the door through which we had entered. Punchinello's guard departed by a connecting door to another room. He stood at a window on that door, out of earshot, but watchful. We were alone with the man who would have killed us more than 9 years ago if he had had the chance, and who had been sent to an imprisonment for life based in part on our testimony. Considering the likelihood of his responding with hostility to any request we made, I wish the prison rules had permitted us to bring cookies. 9 years behind bars appeared not to have left a mark on Punchinello. His haircut was less stylish and less well executed than it had been when he had blown up the town square, but he was as handsome as ever, boyish. His movie star smile seemed genuine. His dazzling green eyes gleamed with lively interest. As we sat across the wide table from him, he wiggled the fingers of his right hand at us, a gesture more commonly made by grandmothers and accompanied by the word toodaloo. "You're looking well," I said. "I feel well," he replied. "It's hard to believe it's been 9 years. Maybe for you. Seems like 100 to me." I found it difficult to believe that he harbored no grudge towards us. After all, he was a Bizzo, therefore marinated in umbrage and steeped in resentment. Yet I wasn't able to detect any animosity in his voice. Inanely, I said, "Yeah, I guess you have a lot of time on your hands in here." I put it to good use. I earned a correspondence degree in law. Though being a felon, I'll never be admitted to the bar. A law degree? That's impressive. I filed appeals on my behalf and for other prisoners. You wouldn't believe how many inmates in here were wrongly convicted. All of them? Lori guessed. Nearly all of them, yes, he said utterly without irony. At times it's difficult not to despair over the amount of injustice in this society. There's always cake, I said, and then realizing that without having heard my dad's favorite saying, Punchinello would think I was spouting gibberish. Taking my puzzling comment in stride, he said, "Well, I like cake, of course, but I'd rather have justice. In addition to getting a law degree, I've learned to speak fluent German because it's the language of justice." Why is German the language of justice? Lori wondered. I don't really know. I heard an actor say that in an old World War II movie. It made sense to me at the time. He spoke to Lori in what sounded like German, then translated. "You're quite beautiful this morning." "You always were a charmer," she said. He grinned at her and winked. "I've also learned to speak fluent Norwegian and Swedish." "I've never known anyone who studied Norwegian and Swedish," Lori said. "Well, I thought it would be polite to address them in their own language when I accept the Nobel Prize." Because he seemed dead earnest, I asked, "A Nobel Prize in what category?" "I haven't decided. Maybe a Peace Prize, maybe for literature." "Ambitious," Lori said approvingly. "I'm working on a novel. Half the guys in here say they're working on a novel, but I really am." "I've thought about writing nonfiction," I told him. "Sort of biographical." "I'm on chapter 32, Punchinello said. My protagonist has just learned how deeply evil the aerialist really is." He spoke in what might have been Norwegian or Swedish, then translated. "The humility with which I accept this award surely is equal to the wisdom of your decision to give it to me." My favorite, "Hey, how do you feel?" type interview of all time. And I haven't been able to find it, but I'm sure if I go look, I can find it. It was on the radio back in the day, and who records radio shows? I mean, now, nobody, exactly. But when Carmelo Anthony got drafted into the NBA, and a guy approached him and said, "You got drafted number 3, I think, number 4. Is there anyone you'd like to thank?" This young fella said, "First and foremost, I'd like to thank me, because without me, none of this would be possible." That's just thumbs up. That's just greatness. So, yeah. They'll be in tears, Lori predicted. Though he was as loony as he was homicidal, I was nevertheless impressed by his apparent accomplishments. A law degree, learning German and Norwegian and Swedish, writing a novel. I'd need a lot longer than 9 years to do all that. The secret is, I'm so much more able to make the most of my time and to focus my energy without the distraction of testicles. I'd expected we'd get around to this sooner or later. I'm really sorry about that, but you really didn't give me any choice. With a wave of his hand, he dismissed his loss as if it were of no consequence. There's plenty of blame to go around. What's done is done. I don't live in the past. I live for the future. I limp on cold days, I told him. He wagged a finger at me, rattling the chain that tethered his hand to the table. Don't be a whiner. You didn't give me any choice either. I suppose that's true. I mean, he said, if we're going to get into a blame game, I hold the trump card. After all, you killed my father. It's even worse than that, I said. And you didn't name your firstborn son after him like you promised. Annie, Lucy, Andy, no Conrad. A chill traveled my spine as I listened to him recite our children's names. How do you know their names? They were in the newspaper last year after all the hoo-ha. Lori said, by hoo-ha, do you mean his attempt to kill us and kidnap our Andy? I mean, and it's important that she makes that distinction, because what I've learned is that some people, mostly white, say hoo-ha, and they mean they're white people will call it a hoo-ha. I'm sure there's other races that call it hoo-ha than white people, but I only have heard it from white people. So let me rephrase that. The white people in my life primarily call it a hoo-ha when necessary. Hoo-ha. Got you all in check. Yeah. Making a patting motion with his hand as if the gentle Lori, Punchinello said, relax. There's no Hatfield and McCoy thing between us. He could be a difficult man. Maybe difficult isn't descriptive enough, Lori suggested. Tell it like it is, girl, and who will know better than me? Maybe you remember 9 years ago when we were in the subcellar of the bank, when everything was fun and hadn't turned ugly yet? I told you that I had a cold and loveless childhood. You did, I agreed. You said exactly that. He tried to be a good father to me, but it wasn't in him, Punchinello said. Do you know all the years I've been in here, he never sent me a Christmas card or a little money for candy? That's hard, I said, and actually felt a faint flutter of sympathy for him. But surely you haven't come here just so we could tell one another what a bastard he was. I said, actually. He held up a hand to halt me. Before you tell me why you're here, let's agree upon terms. What terms? Lori inquired. Obviously, you want something important from me. You didn't go to all this trouble just to apologize for castrating me, though I appreciate that you did. If you get something from me, it's only fair that I be compensated. Maybe you better hear what we want first, I suggested. No, I prefer to get the basic terms established, she said. Then, if I feel I'm getting the short end of the trade, we can revise the deal. All right, Lori said. First, I like to receive a birthday card every August 9th, and a Christmas card every year. Most of the guys here get cards now and then, but I never do. 2 cards, I agreed. And not junk cards or those ones that are supposed to be funny but are really just mean, he qualified. Something from Hallmark with a nice sentiment. Hallmark, I agreed. Is Hallmark still in business? I don't do birthday cards. I don't do cards. I don't know. I figured they're in business. Like, it's Hallmark. Like, what else are they going to do? Like, does Hallmark have other ventures than cards? And how much do they pay the people to write those ideas that they put on these cards? I bet you it's not enough. People are so underpaid nowadays. The library here is underfunded, and we can only receive books directly from a publisher or a bookstore, not from individuals, he explained. I'd very much like you to arrange for a bookstore to send me every new paperback by Constance Hammersmith. I know those books, I said. She writes about a detective with neurofibromatosis. He goes all around San Francisco wearing a hooded cloak. They're fabulous books, he declared, and seemed delighted to discover that we shared this literary enthusiasm. He's like the Elephant Man, and no one ever loved him. He's always been ridiculed, an outcast, so he shouldn't give a crap about anyone. But he does. He helps people in trouble when no one else will. She writes 2 books a year, I said. You'll get them both as soon as they hit paperback. The last thing is, I'm allowed to have a cash account, and I'd like a little money for candy and gum and now and then cheese doodles. In the end, he had become such a pathetic monster. The money's going to be a problem, Lori said. I don't want much, like $50 a month or $40, and not forever, just as long as seems fair. Life in here without money is hell. When we explain why we're here, I said, you'll see why we can't give you money. But I'm sure we can arrange for a third party to send you an allowance, if we're all discreet about it. He brightened. Gee, that'll be wonderful. When you're reading Constance Hammersmith, you got to have Hershey's bars. The deformed cloaked detective in her books has a passion for chocolate and for the harpsichord. We can't get you a harpsichord, I warned. That's all right. I'm not musically talented anyway. Just what we already agreed. That would make a world of difference. Life in here is so limited. It's not right being made to live with so many restrictions and so few pleasures. The way they treat me, you'd think I killed 1,000 people. You did kill several, Laurie reminded him. But not 1,000, he said. And the courthouse tower fell on that old lady. I didn't intend to waste her. Fair punishment ought to be proportionate to the crime. If only it were, I said. Leaning forward with keen interest, clinking his chains as he folded his hands on the table, Punchinello said, "So I'm just dying to know. What brings you here?" I said, "Syndactyly." Chapter 55. Syndactyly. He flinched at the word, as if I had slapped him. His prison parlor faded from cream to milk to chalk. "How do you know about that?" he asked. "You were born with 5 fused toes on your left foot," I said. "The bastard told you, didn't he?" "No," Laurie said. "We didn't learn about your syndactyly until about a week ago." 3 fingers were fused on your left hand," I said. He raised both hands, spreading the fingers wide. They were nice hands, well formed, though at the moment they trembled violently. "Only the skin was fused, not the bone," he said. But he told me there was nothing to be done about it, that I would have to live with it. His eyes filled with tears, which he shed copiously, silently. He made a bowl of his hands and poured his face into it. I looked at Laurie. She shook her head. We gave him time. He needed several minutes. Beyond the windows, the sky had darkened, as if some celestial editor had cut the days from 3 acts to 2, eliminating the afternoon, splicing morning to twilight. I had not known what to expect from Punchinello when we made these revelations, but of all the reactions that I had anticipated, this misery was not among them. The sight of him in this condition shook me. When he could speak, he revealed his sodden face. The great Bezo, he told me the way I walked, hobbled by 5 fused toes on 1 foot, gave me a natural advantage as a clown. When I did a funny walk, it was authentic, he said. The guard at the observation window watched, expression curious, no doubt astonished to see the ruthless killer weeping. People couldn't see my foot, just the funny way I walked, but they could see my hand. I couldn't always keep it in a pocket. It wouldn't have been ugly, I found myself assuring him, just different and damn inconvenient. Oh, it was ugly to me, he said. I hated it. My mother had been perfection. The great Bezo showed me photographs of her. Many photographs of her. My mother had been perfection, but I was not. I thought of my mother, Maddie. Although lovely to the eye, she falls short of physical perfection. Her kind and generous heart is perfect, however, and worth more than all the glamour in Hollywood. From time to time, as I grew older, the great Bezo took photographs of my deformed foot and hand. Without a return address, he mailed them to the swine of swines, the old syphilitic weasel, Virgilio Vivacemente. Why? Laurie asked. To show Virgilio that his most beautiful and talented daughter had not produced an aerialist, that the next generation of circus stars in the Vivacemente dynasty would have to come from his other and less promising children. How could I, with my foot, walk a high wire? With my hand, how could I switch from trapeze to trapeze in midair? When did you have the surgery? I asked. When I was 8, I came down with a bad case of strep throat. The great Bezo had to take me to a clinic. A doctor there said that with the bone not involved, separating fused digits would be easy. After that, I refused all instruction in clowncraft until I was made whole. He nodded. After the surgery, I tried hard to keep my end of the bargain, but I was a lousy clown. From the moment my toes and fingers were separated, I knew. You were born an aerialist, Laurie said. Yes. Secretly, I took some instruction. Too late by then. One has to begin practicing even younger. Besides, in the eyes of that talking sewer sludge, Virgilio, I was tainted with clown blood. He'd pull all the strings in this web to prevent me from performing. So eventually, you decide to throw your life away in a frenzy of vengeance, I said, pretty much quoting him from the night that we had met him in 1994. He repeated what he had told us almost a decade ago. Might as well die if I can't fly. The crazy story he told you about the night of your birth, the assassin nurse, and the doctor bribed by Virgilio to kill your mother. That was all a grotesque lie, I told him. Punchinello smiled through his tears and shook his head. I sort of suspected it might be. This admission chilled me. You sort of suspected it might be? But you still came back to Snow Village to kill a bunch of people and blow stuff up? He shrugged. It was something to do. The hatred was something to hold on to. I didn't have anything else. Something to do. It's a slow Friday night, so let's go blow up a town. Instead of giving voice to that thought, I said, you seem to have a facility for foreign languages. You could have become a teacher, a translator. All my life, I had never been able to please a great Bezo, and there was no one else who wanted me to please them. Being a teacher wouldn't have impressed him, but taking extreme vengeance for my mother's death, I know that made him proud of me. An almost beatific smile overcame him. I know my father loved me for that. Really? I asked with scorn I could not entirely conceal. You know he did? He never even sent you a Christmas card. A little knife of sadness whittled at his smile. I'll grant you he was never a good father, but I know he loved me for what I did. Lori said, I'm sure he did, Punch. I think you did what you had to do. With those words, she reminded me that we had come here to win him over, not to alienate him. Her approval, insincere to my ear but genuine to his, restored Punchinello's faltering smile. If things hadn't gone all wrong that night in Snow Village, you and I might have had a future together, instead of you and him. Boy, that's something to think about, isn't it? She replied and matched his smile. Syndactyly, I said again. He blinked, and his witless smile morphed into puzzlement. You never said how you knew about that. I wasn't born with hand problems, but I had 3 fused toes on my right foot, 2 on my left. More appalled than astonished, she said, What in God's name kind of rotten hospital was that? I marveled that he could seem sometimes so sane and sometimes so flat out crazy, that he could be smart enough to earn a law degree and learn German, but could say something so stupid as what he had just said. It had nothing to do with the hospital. I should have blown it up too. With a glance, I consulted Lori. She took a deep breath and nodded. To Punchinello, I said, we both had fused digits because we're brothers. We're twins. He favored me with a look of amazement, then gave some of it to Lori. Next came a slow, crooked grin with a squint of amused suspicion. Try that one with some dope who's never seen himself in a mirror. We don't look alike, I said, because we're fraternal twins, not identical twins. Chapter 56. I didn't want to be his fraternal twin, not only because that made me the brother to a homicidal maniac, but also because I didn't want to put Conrad Bezo's picture in the family album and label it father. Natalie Vivacamente Bezo might have been beautiful beyond imagining, perfection of the flesh, but even she was not welcome in my family tree. I have one father and one mother, Rudy and Maddie Tock. They, and only they, raised me to be the person I am, gave me the chance to become the person who I was meant to be. I was destined for baking, not for the big top. If their blood does not run in my veins, their enduring love does, for they have all my life given me transfusions of it. Other possibilities, that Natalie might have lived, that even if she had died, I might have been raised by Conrad, did not bear contemplation. Besides, those other possible lives all fall in the category it never could have been. Think about it. Grandpa Joseph, not my true grandfather, made predictions not about his real grandson, who was born stillborn that night, but about me, the infant that Rudy and Maddie would incorrectly believe was their own. Why would he have psychic visions of events in the life of a grandson to whom he wasn't in fact related? I can only believe that some higher power, aware of the quirk of fate that was about to occur, used my grandfather not solely, or perhaps not even primarily, to warn me of 5 terrible days of my life, but also, and more important, to ensure that Rudy would believe with all his heart that this infant with fused toes, who would grow up to have no resemblance to his parents, was the child that Maddie had carried for 9 months. Grandpa Joseph told Rudy that I'll be born at 10:46 p.m., measure 20 inches in length, weigh 8 pounds 10 ounces, and have fused digits. By the time I was handed to him, wrapped in a delivery room blanket, Dad already knew me and accepted me as the son that fulfilled his father's deathbed predictions. Some guardian angel didn't want me to wind up in an orphanage or to be adopted into another family. He wanted me to take the place of Jimmy Tock, who had died on the way into the world. Why? Maybe God thought the world was short one good pastry chef. Maybe he thought Rudy and Maddie deserved a child to raise with the love, the sweetness, and the selflessness that they had lavished upon me. The only full and true answer lies in mysteries so deep that I will never plumb them, unless they are revealed to me after my own death. One thing I said is wrong. Jimmy Tock did not die on his way into the world, a nameless infant perish. I am the only Jimmy Tock, the only one who was meant to be, son of Rudy and Maddie, regardless of the loins I sprung from. I was destined for pastries, and for Lori Lynn Hicks, and for Annie Lucy Andy, destined for more that I do not yet know, and every day of my life I fulfilled the plan, even if I cannot comprehend it. I am profoundly grateful and humble, and sometimes afraid. In 1779, a poet named William Cowper wrote, "God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform." Way to go, Bill. From behind his slow, crooked grin and his squint of amused suspicion, Punchinello said, "Tell me about it." "We brought along someone who might be more convincing," Lori said. I went to the door, opened it, leaned into the corridor, and asked Charlene Coleman, the earthly instrument of my guardian angel, to join us at the table. Chapter 57. Charlene Coleman, maternity ward nurse on that night that I was born and still on the job at 59, has not entirely lost her Mississippi accent after all those years in Colorado. She's as sweet-faced now as she was then. I don't know. In this book, he put, and I know Dean Koontz, I know he's not, I know he better not be. I know he better not be a racist. But still, he put, she's as sweet-faced now as she was then, and certainly is black. I don't know about that, Dean. I mean, sure, like, black don't crack. I mean, unless you're Sammy Sosa, like, but still, you didn't have to state it. Like, that's like saying, he was still as tall as ever. Dick still as big. Like, we don't need to know that. Like, that didn't need to be entered into the annals of history. Certainly is black. That's the one thing in this book. Like, nah, bruh. She has gained some weight, which she attributes to years of free pastries from my father. But as she says, if you want to get to heaven, you first got to get through life. And you need some padding for all the hard knocks along the way. Few women have more presence than Charlene. She is awesomely competent without being smug. She's determined without being bossy, morally certain without being judgmental. She likes herself, but she isn't full of herself. And she's a nurse, y'all. She reminds me of my wife. I don't know. At the table, Charlene sat between me and Lori, directly across from Punchinello. She said to him, "You are a red-faced, pinch-faced, fussy little bundle, but you turned out the kind of handsome that breaks hearts without trying." To my surprise, a blush brought color to his prison pallor. Punchinello seemed pleased by the compliment, but he said, "Not that he's done me any good." Little lamb, never question the gifts God gave you. If we don't make anything of our gifts, that's our fault, not his. Damn. Bars. She studied him a moment. What I think is you never really knew you were a good-looking boy. You don't quite believe it even now. And you know, that's wild that I'm reading this right now while I'm going through what I'm going through in my life. I started exercising again. I do it like every couple of years, but this year, in addition to exercise, I'm also using Ozempic, the BBL Drizzy. They should really use that music for a commercial and then duck. And so I'm losing weight. I'm doing well. And the end goal is to eventually have surgery done, the gastric bypass or whatever surgery it is. I don't know. I don't really want to get it, but I have to. I say all that because there's certain things you don't know about yourself if you never look in the mirror. Like, until somebody told me I was ugly, I didn't know it. And I'm not. But until somebody said it, I was like, somebody thinks I'm ugly? Like, damn. Until somebody told me my hair was stupid, I didn't know it. Until somebody told me my hair needed to get cut off, I didn't know it. Until somebody told me my bald head looked better than hair with cheese, I didn't think it. Until somebody told me my podcasts were too long, I wasn't aware of it. Until somebody told me I talked too much, I wasn't trying to be quiet. Until somebody told me a lot of things. And I think that's the same for some of us. Until somebody tells you that you can be loved, you don't know. Well, honestly, until somebody shows you love, you don't know what love is. But until somebody tells you that they don't like you, you don't know that everybody doesn't like you. You don't know if there's danger in the world until danger presents itself. You don't know that stepping out into the street, it might kill you when there's a car coming. You don't know that cars hurt. You don't know that everybody's not your friend until they stab you in the back. You don't know that not everybody's in your corner until it falls apart. You don't know that you weren't supposed to say that until it gets said, and then you have to deal with the repercussions. You don't know. Everybody else is your mirror sometimes. I don't look in mirrors too often. Like, when I get out the shower, I'll look and I'll be like, damn. And then I feel down again. But then I start to forget about what was in that mirror, and I start to feel great again. And it's just this cycle. And I feel like it's a cycle for everybody else. Like, when you're not in the presence of people who are trying to darken your path, who are trying to bring you down, you don't have an evil mirror in front of you. You just have life. And you're walking through life and you're feeling great and you're doing good and your head is high. And then somebody will tell you, well, we don't feel like you're worthy of this, or we don't feel like you're doing that, or we don't feel like you should have gotten this promotion, or you're not good for this job. You're putting out applications for positions because you feel like you're good enough for it. And you get the response back that we didn't choose you. And just like that, there's a darkness that you didn't know was there. You're not good enough for that. You're not ready for that. I don't know. Like, mirrors are evil things sometimes, but you can look in a mirror and it's just you, and you can assess what you want to assess from what you see in a mirror when it's just you in the mirror. When somebody else chooses to be that mirror, first of all, it's usually never when you ask them to be that mirror. They usually just volunteer it out of nowhere to be that mirror. Oh, you're chunky. Oh, you're this, you're that. And then you can't shake it for a while. It lingers, at least with me. I don't know about all of y'all. I have things that I'm dealing with. But for y'all, it might be different. Who knows? I hope so. He stared at the hand that had once been cursed with syndactyly. He spread the fingers, worked them independently of one another, as though they had been separated only yesterday, as though he were still learning how to use them. Your mama was beautiful too, said Charlene, and as sweet as a child, but fragile. Looking up from his hand, he returned by long habit to the mad fantasy that his father had concocted. She was murdered by the doctor because... None of that, Charlene interrupted. You know crazy when you hear it, as sure as I do. And when you pretend to believe things that aren't true, just because it's easier than dealing with the facts, you turn your whole life into a lie. And where's that get you? Here, he acknowledged. When I say your mama was fragile, I don't mean just because she died giving birth, which she did, though the good doctor tried everything to save her. Her spirit was fragile too. Something seemed to have broken it. She was a frightened little thing, afraid of more than just childbirth. She grabbed my hand and didn't want to let go. Wanted to tell me things, I think, but was scared to hear herself say the words. I sensed that if Punchinello had not been chained to the table, and that if the posted rules of conduct had permitted it, he would have reached out to Charlene, as his mother had done. He stared at her, transfixed. His countenance was a pool of sorrow, with drowned hopes in his eyes, and on the surface floated a childlike longing. Though your mama died, Charlene continued, she gave birth to healthy twins. You were the smaller. Jimmy was the bigger. I studied him as he gazed at Charlene, and thought how different my life would have been if she had scooped him up to save him, instead of scooping me. The possibility of our lives exchanged, his for mine, should have made it easier for me to see him as my brother, but I could not get my heart around him. He remained a stranger to me. Mattie Tock, Charlene told Punchinello, had difficult labor too, but it turned out opposite from what happened to your mother. Mattie lived, and her baby died. Her final contraction was so painful she passed out, and never knew her child was stillborn. I took the precious little bundle and put him in a bassinet in the crochet, so she wouldn't see his tiny body when she woke, and wouldn't have to see him at all if she decided not to. Curiously, when I thought of that stillborn infant, I mourned him as a lost brother, as I could never mourn Punchinello. Lori said, then Dr. McDonald went to the expectant father's lounge to console Conrad Bezo for the loss of his wife, Rudy Tock for the loss of his child. We were shorthanded that night, Charlene recalled. A mean virus had been making the rounds, and people were out sick. Lois Hanson was the only delivery nurse available besides me. When we heard Conrad Bezo shouting at the doctor, so bitter, accusing, and such shameful profanity, we both thought of the twins, but for different reasons. Lois, she figured the sight of his babies would calm Conrad. But I had come off a marriage to a cruel man, and I knew I heard the same violence in this one, rage that can't be put out by kindness, that could only burn itself out in fury. My only thought was to get the baby safe. Lois took you down that hall towards the lounge and got herself shot to death. But I went the other way with Jimmy here and hid out. I had worried that in spite of the revelation that we had both been born with syndactyly, Punchinello would receive Charlene's story with skepticism if he didn't reject it outright. Instead, he appeared not merely to believe it, but to be enraptured by her account. Perhaps he warmed to the romantic notion that he had much in common with the betrayed title character in Alexander Dumas's The Man in the Iron Mask, that he was the equivalent of a heroic peasant, while I, his twin, had ascended to the throne of France. When I discovered that sweet man, our lovely Dr. McDonald, had been murdered, and Lois Hanson too, Charlene continued, I realized I was the only living soul who knew Mattie's baby was born dead, and Natalie Bezo had given birth to twin boys. If I did nothing, Mattie and Rudy would have a tragedy at the center of their lives, an awful thing to get around, and the baby I saved would be put at the mercy of the state, sent to an orphanage or foster homes, or maybe claimed by relatives of Conrad Bezo every bit as crazy as he was. And all his life, people would point and say, that's the son of the murderer. I knew what good, honest people Rudy and Mattie were, and I knew the love they would shower on that boy. So I did what I did, and Lord Jesus forgive me if he thinks I played God. After closing his eyes and absorbing the nurse's tale in silence for a half minute or so, Punchinello turned his attention to me. So what happened to the real you? I didn't at once understand what he meant. Then I realized that the real you was Mom and Dad's lost infant. Charlene had a huge straw purse, I said. She wrapped the dead baby in soft white cloth that night, put him in the straw bag, and took him from the hospital to her minister. I'm Baptist born and raised, Charlene told Punchinello, one of the joyful denominations. I'm a Sunday go-to-meeting girl dress is better for church than for Saturday night, from a family who likes to praise the Lord in gospel songs. If my preacher had told me I did a wrongful thing, I would have undone it, I suppose. But if he had his doubts, compassion swapped his judgment. Our church has its own graveyard, so my preacher and me, we found a pretty corner there for Mattie's baby. Buried him with prayer, just the two of us, and about a year later, I bought a little headstone. When the spirit moves me, I go there with flowers. Tell him what an admirable life Jimmy here is living in his place. How proud he'd be of the fine brother Jimmy has become to him. I have been to the cemetery with my mom and dad, and have seen the headstone, a simple 2-inch thick rectangle of granite. Carved in it are these words: "Here lies baby T. God loved him so much, he called him home at birth." Maybe it's our free will misdirected, or just a shameful pride, but we live our lives with the conviction that we stand at the center of the drama. Moments rarely come to put us outside ourselves, that divorce us from our egos and force us to see the larger picture, to recognize that the drama is in fact a tapestry, and that each of us is but a thread in the vivid weave, yet each thread essential to the integrity of the cloth. When I stood before that headstone, such a moment took me like a swelling tide, lifted me, turned me, and brought me back to shore with greater respect for the unmappable intricacy of life, with more humility in the face of mysteries unresolvable. Chapter 58. Bitter cold compressed the snow from flakes to granules that clicked against the windows of the prison, as if the ghosts of the inmates' victims had haunted the day and tapped for their attention. With Charlene having told all she had to tell and having returned to the hallway, Punchinello leaned towards me and asked with apparent earnestness, "Do you sometimes wonder if you're real?" That question made me nervous because I didn't understand it, because I worried that he would take us off on some crazy tangent from which we could not comfortably approach the request that had brought us here. "What do you mean?" "You don't know what I mean because you've never doubted that you're real. Sometimes I'm walking down the street and it's like no one sees me, and I'm sure I've become invisible. Or I'll wake up in the night convinced there's nothing out there beyond my window, nothing at all but darkness, a vacuum, and I'm afraid to open the drapes and look, afraid that I'll see a perfect emptiness, and that when I turn from the window, the room will be gone too. And I'll cry out, but I won't make a sound, and float there, just float there with no sense of touch, no taste or smell, deaf and blind, the world gone as if it never was. Me with no body that I can detect, no heartbeat I can feel, and yet unable to stop thinking. Furiously and frantically thinking about what I don't have and what I want, about what I do have but want to be free of, about how I am nothing to anyone or anyone to me, never real, and yet all of these memories, these churning, insistent, hateful memories. Despair is the abandonment of hope. Desperation is energized despair, vigorous in action, utterly reckless. He was telling me that everything he had learned, from the use of guns and explosives to the German language, from the rules of law to Norwegian grammar, had been learned in desperation. As if in acquiring knowledge, he would acquire substance, reality. But still, he woke in the night, certain that a devouring void lay beyond his window. He had opened the door on himself, and what I saw within him was both pitiful and terrifying. His words revealed more than he realized. He had shown me that after the deepest self-analysis of which he was capable, he still did not understand the most important thing about himself. Still lived a lie. He presented himself to me, and to himself, as one who doubted his own reality, and therefore the meaning of his existence. In truth, it was the existence of the world he doubted, and only himself that he believed to be real. They call it solipsism, and even a pastry chef like me has heard of it. The theory that only the self can be proved to exist, extreme preoccupation with and indulgence of one's feelings and desires. He would never be capable of seeing himself as one thread in a tapestry. He was the universe, and all the rest of us were his fantasies, to be killed or not as he saw fit, with no real consequence to us or to him. This kind of thinking did not begin as madness, though it might end up indistinguishable from insanity. This kind of thinking began as a choice. It was taught as a philosophy worth consideration in the finest universities, which made him a more formidable figure than he would have been as a poor lost boy driven mad by circumstances. More than ever, he scared the crap out of me. We had come here hoping, needing to touch his heart, but we could no more move him than we ourselves could be moved to make a sacrifice by the mumblings of a phantom in a dream. This was my fourth of my 5 terrible days, and I knew now why I would be the worst of the 5 to date. He will refuse us, and by his refusal, we will be condemned to endure an unendurable loss. "Why'd you come here?" he asked. Not for the first time, when words failed me, Lori knew the right thing to say. She played to the fundamental lie by which he convinced himself that he was a victim rather than a monster. "We came," she said, "to tell you that you're real and that there's a way to prove it to yourself once and for all." "And what way would that be?" "We want you to save our daughter's life. You're the only one who can, and that's as real as anything can get." Chapter 59. From her purse, Lori withdrew a photograph of Annie and slid it across the table to Punchinello. "Pretty," he said, but did not touch the picture. "She'll be 6 years old in less than 2 months, Lori said, "if she lives that long." "I'll never have children," he reminded us. I said nothing. I had apologized once for effectively castrating him, although a surgeon eventually completed the job that I had not quite finished. "She has nephroblastoma," Lori said. "Sounds like a grunge band," Punchinello replied, and smiled at his weak joke. "It's cancer of the kidneys," I explained. "The tumors grow very rapidly. If you don't catch them early, they spread to the lungs, liver, and brain." "Thank God she was diagnosed in time," Lori said. "They took out both kidneys and followed up with radiation, chemotherapy. She's free of cancer now." "Good for her," he said. "Everyone should be free of cancer." But there was a further complication. "This isn't as interesting as all the baby switching stuff," Punchinello said. I didn't trust myself to speak. I felt as though my Annie's life hung by a thread, a filament so fine that I could cut it with one word too sharp. Lori proceeded as if he hadn't spoken. "Without kidneys, she's been on hemodialysis, 4-hour sessions 3 times a week." 6 years old, Punchinello said. "She doesn't have a job to go to or anything. She's got plenty of free time." I couldn't decide whether he was merely as graceless as he was uncaring, or whether he was needling us and enjoying it. Lori said, "At the center of the dialysis machine is a large canister called a dialyzer." "Could that Charlene person get in trouble with the law because of what she did?" Punchinello asked. Determined not to be baited into losing my temper, I said, "Only maybe if my folks wanted to press charges." And they don't. Soldiering on, Lori said, "The dialyzer contains thousands of tiny fibers through which the blood passes." "I usually don't like black people," he informed us, "but she seemed nice enough." "And there's a solution, a cleansing fluid," Lori continued, "that carries away the waste and excess salts." "She's quite a tub, though," Punchinello said. "The amount of food she must pack away each day, you gotta wonder if she ate that baby instead of burying it." Lori closed her eyes, took 2 deep breaths. Then, "It's very rare, but sometimes the dialysis patient is allergic to one or more of the chemicals in the cleansing solution." "I'm not prejudiced against black people. They should have equal rights and everything. I just don't like the way that they aren't white." The dialysis, the cleaning solution, contains a number of chemicals. Only the most minute quantities of those chemicals ever return to the body with the blood. Infinitesimal amounts that are usually harmless. Punchinello said, "I don't like the way their palms are pale and the tops of their hands dark. The soles of their feet are pale too. It's like they're wearing badly made black person disguises that weren't too well thought out." "If the doctor prescribes a dialysate that isn't working as well as it ought to," Lori explained, "or if the patient is sensitive to it, the formula can be adjusted." "One of the ways I know the world is wrong," he said, "is black people being in it. The design would be more convincing if everyone was white." Perhaps without realizing it, he had come as close as he might ever get to admitting that he thought the world was merely a stage, an illusion crafted to deceive him, and that he himself was the only piece of good design in it. Lori looked at me. Her face placid, but her eyes feverish with frustration. I nodded to encourage her. By the minute, I saw less chance of reaching him, but if we gave up, Annie had no hope at all. Once in a great while, hardly ever, Lori said, a dialysis patient is so violently allergic to even the most minute quantities of an array of chemicals essential to dialysates that no adjusted formula will work for her. The allergic reactions grow worse each time until she's at risk of anaphylactic shock. Well, Jesus, give her one of your kidneys, why don't you? He asked. You have to be an exceptional match for her. Thanks to your father, she reminded him. I only have one. To me, he said, then one of yours. I'd have been on the operating table already if I could, I told him. When they tested me to do a transplant compatibility profile, they discovered I have hemangiomas of both kidneys. You're going to die too? Hemangiomas are benign tumors. You can live with them all your life, but they make me unsuitable as a donor. The last thing Grandpa Joseph had said on his deathbed were kidneys. Why should kidneys be so damn important? It's all absurd. It's absurd. My father thought that my grandfather at the end had lapsed back into incoherence, yet those last words were of no importance. We know what the poet William Cowper would say about that if he hadn't died back there in 1800. In addition to waxing on about God's mysterious ways, Old Bill also wrote, behind a frowning providence, God hides a smiling face. I had always believed the same, but lately there were times when, I must confess, I wondered if his smile was as screwy as some with which Punchinello had favored us. Now my murderous brother suggested, sign the kid up on a transplant list like everyone else does. We could wait a year, Lori said, maybe longer to get a suitable match. Lucy and Andy are too young to donate. A year isn't so long. I didn't get surgery for syndactyly until I was 8. Where were you then? You're not listening to me, Lori said tightly. Annie has to be on dialysis in the meantime, but she can't be. I explained already. I might not be a suitable match. Almost certainly you will, I disagreed. It'll be a head in the bucket thing again, he predicted. It always is. Trying to force an emotional connection between him and Annie, Lori said, you're her uncle. And you're my brother, he said to me. But where were you for the past 9 years when the justice system crucified me? Just like Pontius Pilate, you washed your hands of me. The irrationality of his accusation and the delusional grandeur implied by his comparison of himself to Christ allowed no response. Another thing that's all wrong with the black people idea, he said, is a black man's semen ought to be black if a white man's is white. But it's white too. I know. I've seen enough porno. There are days when it seems to me that in literature, the most convincing depiction of the world in which we live is to be found in the phantasmagorial kingdom through which Lewis Carroll took Alice on a tour. Lori attempted to persevere. Sooner than later, anaphylactic shock will kill Annie. We can't risk it again. We're in a corner now. She's literally only got... Her voice broke. I finished for her. Annie's literally got only a couple of days. Putting it into words, I felt a garrote of dread cinch my heart and could not for a moment inhale. So it comes down again to good old Punchinello, my brother said. It always comes down to good old Punchinello. The greatest clown in all history will be Punchinello Bizzo, except I wasn't. But oh, the greatest aerialist of his age will be Punchinello Bizzo, except I was not allowed to be. No one will ever have avenged his mother's death as Punchinello will, except I didn't get away with the money and had my testicles cut off. Now again, of all the people in the world, only Punchinello can save little Annie Tock, whose name rightly should be Annie Bizzo, by the way. Only Punchinello. But in the end, she'll die anyway, because this is, like all the other times, just a setup for the rug to be pulled off from underneath me. His speech had devastated Lori. She rose from her chair and turned away from him. stood trembling uncontrollably. All I could say to him was, "Please. Go away," he told me. "Go home. When the little bitch dies, bury her in the Baptist cemetery beside the nameless baby whose life you stole." 916-633-1537, Ratchet and Ratchet at gmail.com, Ratchet Book Club on Twitter, Ratchet Book Club on Facebook. You can leave a review on Spotify. It takes like 13 seconds. You can also leave a review on Podchaser. Copy and paste that into Apple Podcasts, and then copy and paste that into the Good Pods app. You can donate to the show at patreon.com/single simulcast. $1 will get you a ton of content. You can also donate to the show at buymeacoffee.com/sscast or on the Good Pods app. You can leave a tip in the tip jar. Thank you so much for listening. I greatly appreciate it. Y'all be good. I'm going to holler at you later. Peace. The intro and outro to Ratchet Book Club is by That Kid Garan, and it's called Goodbyes. You can email him at tkgbeats94@gmail.com for more information on how to lease this beat.
This is Single Simulcast. Don't know by now that you slip.